We are live. How's everybody doing today? Sorry about being late. We had some technical situations we had to go ahead and tighten up. This is David W. Williams, also known as Diamond Dave. If you can hear me, let me know that you can hear me live. Let me know where you're coming out of, what part of the country that you're listening to this from. Let's go ahead and get some engagement. We're going to have a really, really good conversation because I brought somebody here that I think is going to be a very, very powerful and informal guest. And what we're going to talk about today is Black conservatism. Is it buffoonery, self-hate, or swirling, or the way to be? With special guest Dominique Huffin. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this particular show is that around the top of the year, I put out a video and I talked about because now that we have Biden in office, are we going to get from the Black conservative sector, especially the ones online, are we going to get solutions and programs as opposed to just more anti-Biden content, right? And I was giving them a challenge to try to create something more than just being against Biden and being against particular Democrats. And one of the things in which I've noticed is that they failed in being able to produce anything except more political entertainment, right? And so this is what we're going to kind of wrap up the year with, is trying to really understand this particular space and get somebody that I know is very much knowledgeable about the political space. I know him from us being in the Atlanta, Georgia area. He has an extensive background from political side in real life, not just on the internet. He's worked on campaigns. He's worked around campaigns. He's created media around the political space. And he can give a lot of contribution to the history of this particular space, what his perception of it is and where he thinks it's going, because I want to make sure that when people are listening to these people on the internet, they have a really good understanding of what this whole scenario, this whole scene is really about. So I got Dominique Huff on. Dominique, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing good, David. How about yourself?
Doing great, doing great. I really appreciate you going. So Dominique, really quickly before we start the show off, let everybody know that just may see the top of the show, where they can find you on social media.
Yes, I'll definitely do that. I have a lot of social media platforms. I host a show that's on hiatus called We the People Talk. Okay. And you can find that on Facebook. You type in We the People Talk, and you can see my headshot there. Go to that fan page. You can also view our content for the men who are listening at DominiqueMag.com. That's DominiqueMag.com. Dominique Magazine. They can type in the name Dominique Magazine, BS Magazine, and it'll show up our website. For the Atlanta people, I do have a local newspaper, myhomerulnews.com. That's MyHomerulnews.com. That's MyHomerulnews.com. So I produce a lot of content. So I see the good, the bad, the ugly in the space. And I can't wait to really get into this conversation. Of course, we'll get the websites throughout the show. I know some people probably say I didn't get that or what have you, but we'll make sure that the listeners will get that throughout for those that have missed it.
Exactly. So all the listeners, if you miss anything they might have said, just put in the chat. We'll make sure you get those URLs. And the reason why I brought Dominique Huff on is one, we're both Southerners. We both have a connection to the South. We're both Southerners. He's a Georgian. I'm a Floridian. I don't necessarily define myself as a conservative. I define myself as a Buccaneer. And so if you're not from Florida, you probably won't get that. But I don't have either one of these political philosophies. But one thing I always respected Dominique was that his actions was actually in the real world and not just on the internet. And that's one of the things that attracted me to him, was that this was a person moving in the real world and actually having actions in the real world and not just on the internet running his mouth. So I think he can really give a lot of really good information on this particular space. And I want to tell everybody that's watching this, we're not going to just talk about problems. As we get on the bottom half of this particular show, I'm going to give you some solutions that I think are actionable based on my perspective of the world. So you got to make sure that you watch this whole show to get to that particular solution part. But we're going to have a really, really thorough instruction. So Dominique, let's go ahead and get into it, man, because we've done all the prerequisites. So the first question I want to ask you is, how do you define Black conservatism?
Black conservatism to me is Black people who support traditional family values. When I say traditional family values, they are people who believe in, being married, having children, the white picket fence, two and a half kids, suburban living, being in town living. They also believe in less government. They believe that the government that governs least, that governs less, governs best. And they're also all about, looking at being constitutionalists. What is in the Constitution is what the government should be doing, not all this other stuff. So you see a lot of people, you hear the terms social conservative, you hear the term fiscally conservative. There are a lot of people who I know that are socially liberal but they are fiscally conservative. There's people who are socially conservative, but fiscally liberal. And that does happen. So that's an oxymoron. So though that's what it was supposed to be, to where it was broken up, kind of like with any movie where you put the word black in front of it, to where it dealt with our particular issues and needs, because we're dealing with a community that votes overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party. No need to really get into that on this broadcast at this time, but that can be talked about later on if we need to. So when you're already in a minority, that brings, as the woke folks say, that those supports intersectionality. So okay, now we're kind of over here in the space where when you're over here with the white folks, they kind of have their own issues of like, yeah, take down the government, this and the third, yada, yada, yada. Our thing is we're trying to make government the same party over and over. We need to be able to be like the Hispanics in some aspects and the Asians and even white suburban women, where we're free agents politically. So we're, okay, who has the best agenda for us at this time? We're going to shift our votes behind them, and then we can shift them back over here later, depending on where they're at, to where you're a free agent. And Tariq Nasheed kind of came, was it Tariq Nasheed? I think that said we should be free agents. I'm not sure if it's him, so I will figure out who said that term. But I always have to make sure with fellow contact creators, if it's their little terms that I like, I give them credit, because I don't want to like to take their stuff like people do mine and taking and running with it. I always give credit before I use it.
Okay, definitely. So, and I understand some of what you said, but let me ask you, we start talking about traditional family values and things of that nature. And so that traditional, to me, is always an interesting word. When we say traditional, whose traditions are we trying to uphold? Are we trying to uphold an American tradition? Are we trying to uphold a Western European tradition? We're talking about traditional values and traditional perspectives of how our relationship should exist with government. Whose traditions are we talking about?
Well, with black folks, it's a hybrid, because you got to realize that we've been over here we came here through slavery. There's some that came here through immigration. There's those, so we have a hybrid of things. Even overseas, you saw a lot of our people, particularly from the African continent and from the islands, Jamaica and Haiti, families are together. You got the mother, you got the father, you got the children. They have lots of children. Over here, we have weaponized feminism to say, well, families are bad, dads are optional, we can do whatever we want to do, but then we have all these problems. The old saying goes, when America catches a cold, black folks catch COVID. When America catches COVID, black folks might as well go ahead and plan the funeral arrangements. So we love talking about getting money, we love talking about getting this wealth, but we all have agreed the first building block to wealth is what? The family. Over 80% of black children are born out of wedlock. Who leads out of school suspensions? Who leads in school in quality of life issues as children? Black children. Coincidence? I think not. Even we went from the most married cohort to now the least married cohort in over 100 years. So there's a problem. So we knew that we had to stay together, because in our African traditions, I don't like to use the word African because it's so many countries in Africa. So in our traditions from the African continent, there we go. From the African continent, we dealt with the fact that we had our empires, we had our families, we had our tribes, we were together. So now that we all came over here, we merged to form families. They said, okay, you're from that tribe, I'm from this tribe. In some aspects, the women, like some people have argued in the Black masculinity movement, the women only came over here to breed more male babies. That theory is being exercised right now. But I said, well, you have a man and a woman, they produce children, those children produce children, and they produce children. So that's how you build a strong lineage. Because our families are so broken up nowadays, where we have data, and I speak off of data, I don't speak off my opinions. I make my opinion based off the data. When you have a study that says a black woman with multiple children is likely to have about multiple men, again, research has shown that. How are we building a family now? And we're not talking about the sitcom by two dads. We're talking about now, you have a daddy, I have a daddy. Your daddy wants to do one thing, my daddy wants to do two different things, which is it. Now, instead of us building together, we're now, okay, I got to go see my dad on the weekend. I got to look at my mom Monday through Friday. I go see the grandparents over the summer. Then I'm splitting my holidays up. Okay, I'm going with dad for Thanksgiving. I got to be with mom for Christmas. So now we're all about adults trying to make things what they wanted instead of the well-being of the child. So when I speak of these issues, I talk about the issue of the children. Too many Black children are unplanned and unwanted. And I'm not going to get started with the whole abortion shit, with the whole 2,000 babies a day have been aborted. And you can only imagine where our numbers have been at, and how we now shit on marriage, how we now think we're okay because we're liberated. I get folks that will fight me down. I get liberals that will fight me down about, oh, this is the best thing. But I said, when I look at what happened to our people, I say maybe that was best for y'all, because when white people came over here, you can look at American literature that showed that white women were afraid that it would be viewed as property here in the new nation that we now call the United States of America. That is, we have literature where white women was writing that shit in there. So they already came over here worried about that shit. We as Black men have shown through research that we are the most progressive when it comes to gender, which even though we're still conservative by nature, most Black people still go to church. Most Black people don't believe in abortion. So even though, despite the abortion numbers, when you look at, we have conservative leanings and conservative tendencies, most Black folks don't want to pay more taxes. But we don't want to call ourselves conservative because of the stuff that goes on. So that's what I look at.
Okay, so and this is really good. Let me ask you one question before we move on to the next question. So understanding why people value Black conservatism, and this has always been one of my questions, and everybody is different. You know, everybody's desires for life is different. I understand some of the arguments that you have from a wealth building standpoint, because that's what my focus is on. But what's interesting is that a lot of times the argument for us to have stronger families, build better relationships, get more educated, is not necessarily to turn us into more of a competitive group. It's more, to me, about presentation to look better to Anglo-Saxons, or what some people commonly term white people. And so that's always been the disconnect, is that, okay, I understand that, you know, we need to have stronger families. We need to make sure that we actually focus more on being, you know, educationally, functionally educated. We need to make sure that we lower crime rates and things of that nature. But it was never presented as a way to turn Black people into more of a competitive group. And we're going to kind of talk about that more in the discussion. It was always, to me, sent to us as where these are more behavioral politics to make us more acceptable to Anglo-Saxons, or what we commonly know as white people.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because we are looking at the symptoms, well, not really the symptoms, we're looking at the effect of the causes. So we want to get mad at what has happened, but we don't want to look at how we have gotten there. Because one reason why we have these abortion laws debates that are going on, and I tell people, you know, I'm neutral with that argument, and I'll explain why later, is it ain't because of Black people, it ain't because of Hispanics, it ain't because of Asians. White people are now about to become the minority in this country. The day they have feared is now, you know, the chickens are coming home to roost, and there are not enough white babies being born. So the white men want the Beckys to still have those children. So they're trying to boost their numbers up, because when I think about family is all about what? Racial preservation, boosting your numbers. Now, we had big families back in the day because we had farms. We had a lot of rural lifestyle, especially here in the South. So you bred children to give yourself farm hands. You know, folks didn't have all this money to do big payrolls and hire employees and all that. So you have a lot of people who had that rural background that were milking the cows and plucking the chickens and picking the eggs and doing all the stuff in the farm, taking the stuff to the market to go sell. We have shifted from that to a more urban culture, which means less children. So we understand that instead of having 8 brothers and sisters, now you may have 2 or 3. Now you may have 1. So everybody else's numbers have shot up. Our numbers have diminished, and we have stayed the same, despite all the other quality of life issues that I think that Black conservatives have failed to argue, because they all about that respectability politics instead of thinking about racial preservation. Now, for the record, we'll have to be remiss if I didn't say this, through my Black masculinist lens, you know, I do promote Black men explore their options. And I'm going to say that on the record for people start saying, but bruh, I see you over there saying that Black men should give the white girl a chance, the Asian girl a chance, this and the third. Yes, I'm going to own that. Why? Because if you're dealing with a culture that is anti-marriage, and you have data that shows the average black man does want to be married, the average black woman doesn't. And I'm not saying this stuff to knock black women. I'm not saying this to criticize them, because black women are doing very well in a lot of categories to the point they are exceeding black men. And we're the only group of racial men whose women are doing better than us. Now, that's a whole other topic for another day. So, I mean, I feel for the sisters, because in their mindsets, I don't have a man who's doing better than me or that's even economically competitive that can provide and protect for me. So they have to they're holding out, or they say, you know what, I got all this, why do I need a man that I still got to carry? Or they see the bad relationships that grandma and auntie had and said, well, grandma and auntie really wasn't happy. And so we have empowered our women that say, hey, don't be like me. I had to get married out of necessity. Back in the day, we couldn't go build a business, start a career, study. There was such a thing called women's majors in college. And I'm not talking women's studies. Women at most colleges, up until I think the 50s or the 60s, maybe the 70s, they only could study certain degree fields. Yeah. If you want to study chemistry, old now says that's the man's major. You go study education or sociology or psychology. You go study that or nursing. So those fields were carved out for them. But yet now that women are more liberated, and I think every man supports that, we're looking at now, we have a group of women, and this goes to all women, that now have a lot more options. So we're looking at, we can't blame the women for the destruction of the family, but we can't blame women either for saying, I want to live my best life now. I want to be able to do me. So I get mad at my fellow black conservatives, I call myself more of a black libertarian / constitutionalist, that we have not looked at these things through a historical lens to say, okay, how do we adjust in the modern day time? We can't compare a family in 1951 to a family in 2021. We have now, women are more educated now. Women are owning more business now. Women are more in corporate now. The average woman is a working woman now. So you're comparing women of today to women of then. It's no comparison. It's apples and oranges. We want to sit them side by side. They can't do that. Even a woman in 1951 wanted to go start a business. Who's gonna give her a loan? Who's gonna give her a credit card? A woman could not get a credit card up to the 80s without a man.
Okay.
So there's a lot of historical stuff. Go ahead.
Okay. So the next question I want to ask as we get more into it. So we kind of define black conservatism, and I really appreciate your feedback on how you defined it. So why do we think currently today there's a disconnect from what we're seeing of black conservatism today, of the black conservatism people like Booker T. Washington? You might remember Tony Brown. We look at people like Condoleezza Rice, but our current black of online TV black conservatives. So we have this online TV black conservatives that we've seen today that have really been kind of boosted to the forefront because of social media. And how do we contrast that to the old school black conservatives of people like Booker T. Washington, Tony Brown, or Condoleezza Rice?
Well, what we're looking at today is entertainment. Okay. So where when I look at Candace Owens, Candace makes valid points here and there, but then Candace gets on this rah stuff, go white people, we should be more like them. She doesn't actually say it like that, but you gotta look at where she goes. Because Candace was a Democrat not too long ago, believe it or not. Candace loves to talk about, we should pull the race card, but Candace sued an institution for racism. People forget about that. And who was standing with her when she sued? Black people. Now Candace is a full-out conservative or a Republican, where we want to call her. And I do people say, well, damn it, people change. Like we got the Hodge twins out here. We used to have the sheriff that used to do this crap. We have a lot of these black conservatives that to me, and I blame both them and I also blame the liberal media. Because the media, this stuff is done to make a mockery and a fool out of you. Because they would never bring a black conservative libertarian or constitutionalist like me on the platform, because I would actually talk policy and substance, not come here and be your tap dancing monkey to say the stuff you want to say about black folks. Because I can always put that back to some of these white folks. But there's more white folks on welfare than it is black folks. There are more deadbeat white mothers than it is black mothers. So, but when I say that stuff, that we got data and research to prove, watch your mouth. But if I say that about black people, so it's entertainment. because if you look at white conservatives that come to a black platform, do they talk about white people? Do they talk about poor white trash? Do they talk about all this stuff? No, they talk stuff from policy, about how we should vote, about the political agendas, about stuff like that. When you see black conservatives, do they talk about the political agendas? Do they talk about legislation? Do they talk about different things? No, it's all about just, I'm the elite Negro, I'm the chosen Negro, I'm the model Negro. And it kind of comes to the point where the media knows what they're doing, because it kind of hurts the movement, and black conservatives need to kick back on that. Instead of just being so happy that we have somebody black on the space, and say, no, that's not how this shit works. So it's all about stereotypes. It's nothing. It's just like back in the day, using some TV history. I love history. When it came to we'll start with women first. Women were housewives. They were helpless. They were hapless. They were clueless. That's how they framed women on a lot of these old shows back in the day, where the man had to come and save her from the day Popeye and olive oil type thing. Just like the black folks were using broken English, like yes, sir, master, all this type of stuff, old the watermelon entertaining. So when you see this stuff, it's kind of like, it's no different than the stereotypes against women. It's no different than the stereotypes against black folks. No different than stereotypes against Asian folks, where they had the Asian guy smiling and laughing and nodding his head all the time with his eyes closed. That's what I look at with black conservatives. They are making a mockery out the movement. Okay,
I'm really glad you said that, and I want to ask you a question to follow up with that. Because when we start talking about these media platforms, their number one job is to get views so they can sell advertisement. So why do we think on a quote unquote conservative platform, there is a audience or a market for black conservatives in quotes that essentially just create the kind of content about black people that you said that they're creating? Why do we think that there is a positive reception to that, as opposed to the market or the audience demanding black conservatives who actually talk policy or actually talk constitutionality?
Well, because I'm gonna tell you why. Because a lot of them don't know these topics. They're all thumbs. They're all wet on this stuff. Had they know this stuff, you would hear more about that. Because even with the social issues, there's social policies that we have to look at. Like, for example, we love to talk about black criminality, but we know the most unemployed, the least employable, the first hired, let me rephrase my quote. When it comes to black men are the most unemployed, the most underemployed, the last hired, first fired. Nobody's giving you a grant. Nobody's going to give you a loan. Nobody's going to look out for you. And then affirmative action gives a minority woman a slot that you could have gotten. So when you look at these men who cannot work, who do not have the skills due to arrested development, then they have to figure out a way how they're going to survive, which means they're going to have to commit crimes. When I say crime, I'm looking at petty theft. So we want to talk about all these black men out here robbing, saying, go get a job. But when these jobs left the cities where most black people live at and move these warehouses and these companies off bus lines, how are these people going to get to work? Or now we're raising the standard where you have to have a college degree. Or, instead of some college. I remember back in the day, it was either some college or a degree was optional now, or you had to have a degree. So we know black men have fallen that. Why? And people say, well, black men need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but let's look at the dynamics. Broken families. The black child is now the de facto man at the house. He's now having to take care of his brothers and sisters. Same thing with the oldest female child. She has to take care of her. She's now the de facto auntie. So we want to talk about, well, look at y'all. Why can't you do it? Well, you can't compare a struggling black family with no father in the home to a middle-class white family with a father in the home. We're dealing with two incomes versus one and some government benefits. That's not a fair comparison. So they don't want to have that conversation because they know now we have to now put a mirror in front of what America has done. As one the conscious rappers has said, that you take away my father, you took my father out of my home, now you want to mock me for being fatherless.
Okay, I understand. Appreciate that feedback. So now the next question is, and we kind of talked about this, and we kind of want you to expand on this a little bit more. Do you believe the current batch of this online TV black conservatives do they have anything to teach black people, or do you just see them as entertainers?
I see them as entertainment, to be honest.
Okay.
Because, you know, if you want to engage black people, why are you talking to suburbanized white folks? Why are you talking to affluent white people? It's kind of like, if we want to, and I see this with Republicans' minority engagement. You want to engage minorities, but you want them to come to you. I call that's come to the hood with some penny loafers and a bow tie and some shorts on and try to play basketball, but you're looking so scared to talk to the guys over there. They say, "Hi, my name is Crandall. What's your name?" "Hey man, what up?" Like, ooh, that's a little aggressive, don't you think? Let's try it again. Let's shake hands like that. Like, motherfucker, if you don't get out the way, you're about to get us all shot at right now because we really stand out over here. They probably think we're some undercover cops over here trying to figure out who got warrants. And I said, if they keep doing that dumb stuff, I said, look, y'all, I don't know him. Before y'all bust a cap into his ass, y'all need to be a 5-minute running start. So I'm long gone. But you know, they come to the black neighborhoods, and then you don't tell nobody. You talk down on them. You want to act like, you know, well, the Democratic Party is bad. Get off the Democrat plantation. Get off of it right now. But sir, ma'am, you're on the Republican plantation. Why do you like being a Republican? Well, it's better than Democrats, this and the third. So I've seen a lot of black independents ask, well, can you tell me about your party, your platform, without bashing the Democrats? Now, there's some disingenuous stuff with that because some of these folks are really close. I call them, when I hear black independent, I always say closet black Democrat because most of them are Democrats, but we do not have serious policy conversations. See, I'm not here for party. I'm here for the policy. What policies are good? Because case in point, I voted for President Donald Trump last year. I voted for him both times, actually, because the Democratic Party has left me as a black man behind. There's nothing for me over there. There's commentary that they have admitted they have a black male problem. If you say I'm toxic, I'm cisgender, I'm conquered, I'm weak, I'm a hotel, I'm the help, I'm ashy, whatever, why am I going to sit in a room where I'm literally being insulted, but then you want me to shut up and follow your lead? What's in it for me? That's what black men and black people have to ask now when it comes to political policy. What's in it for us? Why are we giving you our vote? This is what we need. This is what we want. Dr. Claude Anderson said it best. Why are you voting without an agenda? And when we say agenda, what do we want? And then what mechanism we'll put in place? If you can't buy a politician, then rent one. So I get what I want out your ass. I'm throwing you in the trash can. Once we understand the public policy process, we can stop saying fuck it and start playing the game. See, a lot of people will say, oh, I hate politics. I said, just because I'm not interested in politics, but yet I would admit I get very sloppish. You can tell me more about Kanye West and Honey Boo Boo and all this other bullshit, but you can't tell me if you live in a city or an unincorporated area. You can't tell me who your mayor is. You can't tell me what are some major issues there before your city government right now or your county government if you're unincorporated. You can't tell me who your state rep is or your state senator is, but you can tell who the president is. Yeah, so and those are issues that I take exception to.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And one of my biggest challenges is that when looking at these online black conservatives, and everybody has a right to live whatever kind of life they want to live. This is America. But it seems as that the value proposition for being a conservative on the male side by the leadership of this particular movement is that I get sexual access to white women. So that's their value proposition. Their second value proposition is that I get to integrate amongst white people. And that's essentially their value proposition. And so because that's not things that are important to me, we're not talking about economic policy. We're not talking about the Second Amendment. We're not talking about building a real political power base. I don't really understand where I fit into that because to me, getting sexual access to white women was never that big of a deal to me. And to me, integrating amongst white people was also never that big of a deal to me. So they don't have really anything to offer me to where I no longer want to deal with the Democratic Party, even though the Democratic Party is problematic just based on the things that you said. And one of the biggest things I get from both groups is it's almost like two slaves on two different plantations, advertising to people that they live on the best plantation because of their relationships with the people that govern the plantation.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the biggest problem, and I'm over here that's multitasking, those business on you always get texts coming in. So let's talk about those plantations. The big problem I have with plantations it's kind of like, we're repping projects and apartment complexes. You don't own it, but you want to say, I live in these apartments and you live over there. They're both two shitty apartments. So we have to get to the point where we do have to shift the gears to policy. And that's not just a black conservative problem. That's why I don't follow out these quote unquote political talk shows, because it's rah Republicans, rah Democrats. If you don't get it, then fuck you and all that type of stuff. Instead of us dissecting the policy. Now, I went to school at Georgia State University for public policy and economic development. So I don't expect people to get wet in the pants like I do to read a 200-page piece of legislation. But at least you can read something Cliff Notes or the abbreviated version of this to tell me why you support this or why you don't support this. Because oftentimes I hear a lot of people who simply repeat stuff that they heard instead of saying you have a connection to it. Like if David Williams would tell me, Dominic, I'm a Democrat because, I like the fact that I support abortions. I like the fact that we do need more government safety. We need more government regulation. Like if we had more regulation for COVID, we would not be in this mess right now. We could have got in front of it versus the Republicans that said, oh, well, if you die type attitude. So at least you could give me a personal connection versus, well, they cut food stamps. Oh, they hate women. Oh, they this. Oh, they that. I said, okay, I can go to the website and all that type of stuff. What is your connection to these movements? Tell me your story, black conservative. Tell me your story, white liberal. Because I would argue the most racist person is not a white conservative, it's a white liberal. White liberals will put a Black Lives Matter sign in front of their house in a gentrified neighborhood, act like they care about you, be out there, yo, baby, yo, when they talk to you and all that type of stuff. But as soon as they get done with you, they busy to figure out how to gentrify your black ass out that neighborhood, how to push you out. As soon as you walk through the neighborhood at night, they call the cops on you. But then they want to act like, oh, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. But I tell people, you got to be a right racist. I really need to be racist. I take my racism blatant. That's why I love the South. I don't deal with that little candy-ass racism. Tell me where you stand at, and I can govern myself accordingly. In regards to what you were saying about the sexual access, let's talk about that. I find that I would say with black conservatives, I would even argue that with both the men and the women. I see a lot of sisters trying to come and say, I'm a conservative, so you'll get them a white boy. Or I see a lot of black guys say, I'm a conservative, go get a white girl. But I tell people, you don't have to do all of that type of foolishness if you want to date a white person. Yeah. Because the average white person in a city is a Democrat. So what are you really doing? I mean, you're over here. I've gone to black conservative events where there's a bunch of white people in, and the black conservatives act like they don't want to talk to nobody else black. They wanted to stand by themselves and just wave at all the white people. They get all happy. The white people pat them on the head and shit that, oh, you get it. And they just being such chatterboxes to the white people and all this type of stuff and saying, oh, I'm a proud card carrier Republican, singing, oh, I'm happy to be American, all this shit. But when a black person walks up to you like, oh, I'm doing good. How you doing? Yeah. Could you move out my way, please? It's that quest for white validation and white affirmation that some black conservatives have got to address.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to say this before we move on. There's a really good audio by Malcolm X talking about the House Negro. We're not calling black conservatives House Negroes. But what he was saying is that there's a spirit in a lot of black people that want to be the only black person. And a lot of times in both parties, I see that from a lot of their black Confederates, is that I want to be the only black person in this particular space. And if I see other black people over here, I feel like it's losing value because I'm no longer the special snowflake. And I see a lot of that in both these particular political movements is by black people have this desire to want to be the special snowflake in these movements. And a lot of times they want to make it seem like all other black people that are not here in this room, there's something wrong with them. But then if we get more black people in this room, they no longer feel comfortable. But that's just my personal perspective. Let's go on to the next question. Why do you believe the current batch, and I'm going to also get into this, why do you believe the current batch of the online TV black conservatives skew so young?
Because they want to, because that's business actually. Because we're looking at black we're looking at black conservatives now on the internet. And just like with anything, the millennials are taking over. So they're getting smart by saying you can't have a gray-headed person on here talking about black conservatism to a bunch of millennials. They're not going to listen to that. So now you get somebody who's young, if you notice they're skinny or they're in shape, they're fairly attractive. So you use that to pull the person in there. And that's just to me, this marketing business, how they do that. Because, like you want to get a young person to go talk to older people. Like we always laugh that when you see these young life coaches and they try to talk to older people, like, okay, you're in your 20s, this person in their 50s, what can you tell them about anything? And that's how millennials feel, that what are you going to tell me about a movement and it's a new day and time? Because there is a big growing discontent between the generation, particularly the boomers and the millennials, the Generation X. So they feel you can't tell me shit. So people who are up top said, okay, yeah, we see that. So let's get these younger people who are good with social media, who know how to tweet. Because I remember being in talk radio back in the day. And I remember back when this is back when social media was first getting popping, back in 2006. You had a lot of these old, like black Republican conservative radios, old white guys, the Rush Limbaugh style. These program directors wanted everybody who looked and sounded like Rush Limbaugh because they couldn't afford to put his show on their air. So if you didn't sound like him, if you was a black guy, if you sounded too black, they wouldn't be bothered with that either. So they wanted a black guy who was stuffy, who was safe, who just was that good Negro. So I bring that up where a lot of these people were older men. Women that know outside of Laura Ingraham, there was hardly no women over in that space. So maybe a couple of others here and there, unless she was attracted, he was fucking somebody. I mean, that's just the politics of business or whatnot. So it was always an old white boy gang. Everybody else we threw you on when needed, or we did such a half-ass job with it. And they see, well, people don't want to hear a woman conservative. People don't want to hear a black conservative. But no, you put the wrong people on there that you knew was going to fail. And you want to say, see, we tried to do it. So these older people, they're not good at social media. You struggle to get them old white guys to check emails. When we started to really do more with emails, like, hey, give me out your email. They give out the email to the show. When's the last time you checked the email? I ain't checked the email in 3 weeks. Now, for the listening audience who's just tuning in, mind you, this is a 2006, 2007 era conversation. We're not too far removed from that thinking. So where people had to get used to the tweeting, you get used to putting stuff on Facebook and all that type of stuff. This is back when Facebook was for young people only. So the younger conservatives at that time had a platform that the older conservatives didn't have, social media. Now, when the floodgate opened for social media, it was still, like when you're in the pool and the water's really cold, so you put your feet in the water and you're just standing there and you're like, oh God, this shit is cold, and you try to ease on into the water. That's how a lot of those older conservatives were when it came to social media. Look, we never I know it's laughable now, given that everybody's online and everybody got all that. We got phones and we got all this stuff now. But back in that era, the younger people had a head start of this movement. So then they said, okay, as these people aged out, there was a new set of younger people coming over here. There's a new set of younger people. So they said, okay, you got to have somebody in that space because you got Snapchat, you got TikTok, you got, remember we had Periscope going on for a while. So you had a lot of stuff going on that older people was not on or into, but you got a younger person that could carry that message to over there and they could galvanize. That's how a lot of these people built their platforms. In the case in point, you look at like the Derek Jacksons of the world. Derek Jackson built everything on social media before he started doing offline events. So that's why you get these younger conservatives, because in this space, this is a young people's space. We don't read newspapers. We read an online publication. We don't sit like nowadays, like everybody, like during the pandemic, I was laughing because it was funny watching these old fucktards struggle at doing Zoom meetings. I'm like, man, we've been doing Zoom meetings for the past 5 years. What y'all been at? I mean, that's how, because we're the digital generation. I can talk to people. I have connections all over the country that I have never met, that I have sat here and seen their faces because we are on platforms like this. That was Zoom, that was Google Hangouts back in the day, that there was the free conference calls. So there's a lot of platforms that have come and gone. The Zoom's the one still here that we was able to communicate. So for us, when everybody wanted to work from home, We're like, okay, cool. We're used to that. Because we're like, okay, cool. I'm just throwing my shirt on. We sitting here with my basketball shorts on barefoot while I'm talking to you. For older folks, that was a struggle. So I use that explanation as that's why younger conservatives had that popularity, because who listens to AM radio? Seriously, who listens to that shit now? It's dying. So that's gonna die with you. That's gonna die with your father. So now you got internet radio, and everybody has a platform. Now we got to see who can capture the most people.
Yeah, and so I really enjoy your explanation, but I want to add something to it, and this is why I like the fact that you said before that this primarily was just entertainment. One of the biggest challenges we have is that these conservatives, we talk about these Black online conservatives, have been presented as having a message for Black people. So one of the guys, and we're going to kind of talk about him later, was, I think, the director of urban outreach. The challenge between what they're doing, and this is why I've told people before, I don't think the Republican Party is at all interested in getting Black voters. First, historical reasons, they don't really need them. Two, there's a skew between, and we talked about this, and you noticed because we worked in elections. In fact, you got me my first media buying job in an election, is that the actual, and you can go look at census data, the actual voters, the majority of people that vote in your society, especially in a national election, are north of 55, 60 years old. That's the majority of voters, because people a lot of times vote more as they've invested more into the particular economy or the institution. As we start to go younger and younger, the people that actually vote become a lot less. And then you've also educated me on the fact that on local elections, the actual percentage of people that actually come out and vote in proportion to the people that are registered is actually very, very low. So you get a lot of engagement. You get less engagement as the voters start to become more localized. But the Black conservatives have a message that does not correlate with an older generation of people. And we understand this because we're from the South. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. We both agree that Black people on general are a little bit more conservative from a social standpoint. We take Miss Owens and we put her in the markets of maybe Augusta. We put her in the markets of maybe Albany. We take her in the markets of maybe Savannah, maybe Montgomery, maybe Mobile. Around that older Black crowd goes to church 3 times a week, haven't missed a Bible study in 30 years. She can't tell them that, you know what, you're on a Democratic plantation. She's not going to be able to tell them that, you know what, racism doesn't exist. It's all inside your head. Her message is for a younger generation that they will argue with her. They'll go back and forth with her, and they won't dismiss her off the top. Why? Because they're old enough to be her grandparent. And so I think that I don't believe that the Republican Party is interested at all in recruiting Black votes, because the Black people that vote are really an older cohort, and they don't have a message for an older cohort because they decided that their platform is going to be based around the fact that racism really doesn't exist inside the United States. So you get these Black conservative entertainers, and their message is for a younger audience. And we also talk about Miss Owens. Her desire really is to be a college speaker. That's where she can get a lot of money, $30,000 to $50,000. I know the agencies and the booking agents that represent her. So her message is for college students. It's not for Black people that are north of 55, 65 years old, because their real life experiences won't correlate with her message. You got any feedback on that?
Yes, that's a good assessment, because, again, with minority engagement by the GOP, I think it's a joke. And I've said this, and I've gotten in a lot of trouble with the Fulton County Party here in Atlanta for calling it out, to the point where I was in the meeting where we literally got to shouting, because I called them out for the fuckery and the fraud that shit was. And the minority recruitment director personally cannot stand me, because he thinks that I want his job. I said, no, I don't want your job. I want you to take your job seriously. You know, when I said, well, how many events have you done in South Fulton where the majority of Black folks live at if you're trying to recruit people? I look at data, and I look at, as I ran countywide campaigns for Democrat and Republican candidates. I had a Republican candidate I worked with 2014 that ran for Fulton County Commission chairman. And I looked at his numbers during the primary, because we had no primary, because Fulton County, I mean, already runs a countywide Republican. We haven't had a countywide Republican since 2006. And I think Karen Handel knew that day was done. That's why she ran for Secretary of State and won. But when you look at where the county is going, you look at, okay, you got these pockets over here. If I'm seeing in each state they've got, let's add up all the Republicans. Well, who are these people voting Republican in Southwest Atlanta? Do we know what these people are? Can we map out their houses? But then when you get the bigger data, when you get to these vote builder files and the win red files for the parties, we got to look at who's a hard R. What are we doing to those hard R's that live in Southwest Atlanta or East Florida, College Park, say in South Florida, and Hateville, and elsewhere? How are we engaging them? Do we send them a piece of mail? I think we should send them all a piece of mail. Everybody that lives Atlanta South who has voted Republican in the last 3 elections, that's engaged now. Let's figure out who they are, where they're at. Let's really do a deep data dive of where these people live in. What type of house do they have? Do they live in an apartment? What type of family do they have? We need to really study that. And hey, I think that's came up with a consulting contract. Who are these people? Well, they can be for any county. Who are these people? Let's really look at that through that data and really get to know them. And nobody has done that because, like you said, they don't need all the black folks. As long as you got the black folks that just, they like the Republican platform, it's enough for them to where I ain't got to do shit down there at all. Where, case in point, a heavy conservative county, a Democrat is not going to try to run countywide or in that district because they know it's just a fool's errand. Nobody's to take you seriously. It's going to be throwing a bunch of money for a fool's run, and you won't get no press coverage. Nobody's doing any debate. They already know you can't win. So, but the Democrats will work at it. They will look at, Democrats love flipping stuff. They have flipped Gwinnett County here. They flip Cobb County here. They flip Douglas County. They flip Rockdale County. So the Democrats are working on flipping. They're taking counties away from the Republicans, but Republicans got to look at how can we flip a blue county? How can we flip a blue state? And the old Republicans did that back then. Georgia was Democrat in 2002. The Republicans did grassroots, they did outreach, they touched people, had a good message, they connect to people, and guess what? They got fat, they got lazy, they kept saying, man, we're winning. We kept winning elections. Had our first governor since Reconstruction as a Republican in 2002. And had the Republican office ever since. Now you're in danger of losing, like you saw that you lost both the Senate seats last year, or earlier district was in the runoff. Now you can say, okay, was that a fluke? Or was that, okay, the Democrats are doing a good job? Or was that just, well, it was a vote, like I tell people sometimes in politics, I can always define it as, like the case in point with some candidates that won here locally, they didn't win off their own merit. And then the candidates have all have cussed me out for saying that. And I said, you went off your own merit because you ran against a person that everybody thought was a piece of shit. So, because the vote for you was a vote against them. And I voted like that before. I voted for people who I personally think is a piece of shit. But I said, I'd rather deal with a new piece of shit than the old piece of shit. So I told people, I voted for idiots just so we get that person out of office, or just to send a message that, hey, you got, this idiot got 40% of the vote against you. So you need to take it seriously, or next time you'll be packing your shit and getting out of there. So we have to start, we're really serious about running parties. We got to start looking at winning elections, not just being rah-rah, let's go to the country club, let's have sandwiches, that's all to sing, that's all say the pledge to say how much we love to be an American. What are we going to do for engagement, not only with minorities? We got to look at engagement with women. We got to look at engagement with the LGBT community. We got to look at engagement with our millennials. There's so many pieces of this pie now that we have to dissect. I have not seen a plan that is serious about touching these audiences. Millennials are getting more liberal, and Generation Y is probably even more liberal. So your movement is starting to die out now because they're thinking, because of the shit you see on TV, which goes back to what I said earlier in this broadcast, we're dealing with a more liberated society now. You're dealing with people who don't believe in marriage. Marriage is down across the board. You're dealing with people now who say, hey, we can co-parent now. Hey, I'm going to have my own. I'm going big town. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to adjust to the times? Marriage now does not mean to a man and a woman. It can be two men. It can be two women. Don't argue with me. Argue with the Supreme Court. So, I mean, that they have got that right to be married. So now we got to look at, okay, since you say you believe in family, now we got to say we may have two gay people trying to raise a child. We have to embrace that. It has changed. No matter how much you don't like it, that is a family. If we're saying we're building family, which is a building block of wealth, you have to embrace the fact that it's Adam and Steve, not Adam and Eve. We have to embrace the fact that they still have not gotten this to their heads, that it can be a black man, a white woman, a black woman, a Chinese man. If we're saying family, that does not mean a white family, a black family, a Chinese family, Hispanic family. We are a diverse society now. I'm not, those I can say post-racial. We're also a very elitist society too. We have a lot of class issues that nobody wants to address. But we have to acknowledge that the family, for my argument, we first have to accept the family structure has changed. And it's no longer man and wife. It's husband and husband, wife and wife. It's no longer black this, black that. It can be black and white, black and Asian, black and whatever. They're having children. Or we can deal with the Brady Bunch style family. Man had kids from a previous relationship, woman had kids from a previous relationship. So family has really changed. If we're saying we want to have stronger families, we have to meet some of these families where they're at, especially if they're still trying to keep things together.
Okay. And I want to ask the audience, we got 57 likes, about 100 people on the stream. I want to ask you, can we get those likes up? I really appreciate it. So the next question, Huff, is going to be, how come, and I'm asking you, and because I know that, you very, very have an extensive understanding of the political space. You've been doing political media for a very long time. How come, and you kind of touched on it, but I'm going to kind of ask you to expand a little bit more. How come you decided to not take the talking points of this current batch of online TV Black conservatives, even though by doing that, it could have been financially beneficial to you, it could have promoted you socially? How come you decided not to take their talking points?
Same reason why I decided to follow Tony Sotomayor's footsteps. When I became an advocate for men, I was told by a lot of media professionals that I need to go in on women, become a misogynist, bash. I'm a black guy. Oh, you should bash black women, and you can make a ton of money. Now, everybody hates you, but you'll be well paid, you'll be well popular, people just can't wait to listen to you. But I have integrity. I have to look at myself in the mirror. Because I'm a firm believer, and people who follow me, especially my men's side of the internet world, I'm a firm believer, fellas, don't talk this tough shit online, but you're a little bitch offline. Nobody respects that. Be consistent. And one thing that people have said that have met me from both of my Facebook profiles is I have people who still think I'm an asshole, a piece of shit, and they're offended I'm alive, that will say, you know what, Dominic is consistent. He ain't gonna talk that shit online and won't say that shit on the phone and won't say that shit offline. I've shown people a day in my life. So I'm all about what you see is what you get. I don't want to be this cool online or on TV, but I'm doing something totally different. What I look like out here bashing gay couples, and I'm saying the men's movement, we got to recognize that there's some gay men that agree with what we're saying, and we have to embrace them. So I can't have two different messages. So I'm all about being consistent. Am I perfect? No. Nobody's probably perfect on that. But I'm all about, I want to be the full package of who I am. So I lost lots of opportunities with not only the men's side, but even the conservative side. People have felt that I've been called a fool because they said, well, you're still over here struggling. You're still trying to get things off the ground. So first of all, who says I'm struggling? Who says, yeah, I'm not where I want to be at. I've been through some shit. Who hasn't? But at the end of the day, I can still face myself in the mirror. I don't have nothing I can be ashamed of. I don't have to worry about, I did this to get money, and now I'm ready to get out of space. A lot of these people will not transition out of space very well. And this is from a media professional who's now, 23 years in the business. I started back in high school. So now you're dealing with stuff that is not going to age very well. So it's one thing, like as we say on TV, you grow, you evolve, and we should see that through the characters, through character development. Same thing I say with talk radio hosts is you should ultimately grow and evolve. And what you started talking about back in 2007 and what you're talking about now. So if you're not evolving, then to me, you are a persona, you are a character that can't back the stuff up. And so I tell people, I live with me, I had to face who I am. I'm trying to build a legacy. I want to get married and have children. So I want to know that when kids say, yeah, my dad says that on TV, but my dad is really like that offline. And I respect my father for being consistent. And I would tell my sons that I want him to have my name. I said, Junior, you have my name. Now, you don't have to follow my footsteps. You can go ride the back of a garbage truck all day for all I care. I will still love you anyway. But one thing that I want to be made consistent is the principles and the values I teach you. Be consistent in all things. Don't be this way over here. Don't be this way over there. Political 101 here in Fulton County. North Fulton and South Fulton are two different worlds on so many levels.
Yeah.
Don't be a countywide candidate talking that shit in North Fulton, but then you say some different shit in South Fulton. Don't say some shit in South Fulton, then you won't say in North Fulton, because my candidates have been trained to call you out. Don't be up in the alphabet and say, yeah, we're going to cut the food stamps off. We're tired of South Fulton carrying that weight. We're going to say, well, you supposed to say that last night in the debate at Union City when you call these folks trackers and racists and that you can't stand them. So won't you explain that? And just in case you lie, we have it here. We record it here on the phone. We can play it for everybody. You got to always realize there could be an asshole out there. We're in call-out culture now. Somebody somewhere knows who you are. So be consistent and say yourself to embarrassment.
Okay, I appreciate that feedback. So the next question is going to be, and we want to ask this. So looking at this current batch of these online TV Black conservatives, why do we think they're so loyal and so tied to Republican Party on a local and national level? They don't necessarily talk policy. They don't talk constitutionality. It's this really, really heavy attachment to the Republican Party, kind of masked as conservatism.
Well, it's really just kind of like, I call it racism and elitism masked in to a chocolate face. Okay. Because what they want to do now is they know they can't say this shit no more. They know they can't. We saw what happened to Don Imus in 2007 with the nappy-headed hoes comment. Now, a black man can say the term nappy-headed hoe, he ain't going to get counts. They may call him a misogynist or a black woman hater, but he's not going to have a whole bunch of shit stripped from him because they say, well, that's just culture and that's how they talk. Because he says that what they do is, I know I can't say it, but I know you can. So you come over here and say this stuff to where you can say all this craziness, we make you laugh and all this type of stuff, and we give you a little money. So you get all this money, and these folks are going back home, not solving that one problem. I will ask these black conservatives, they were all on this panel with me right now, what legislation have you championed? Since you had the voice, you had the platform, you have their ear, just like these Black Lives Matter activists that sat in meetings with mayors and judges and all these prosecutors, okay, you got all their attention. What did you do when you sat in the room? What did you get out of it besides a selfie and you ate a nice Subway sandwich and you got a picture that you go on social media? What can we say is a next step? That's just where I'm at now. What is the next step? You got the attention. You in the room with the president. What are you getting? What policies are you championing? If you say you like the First Step Act, if you say, hey, you like the PUA for the gig workers, what are you doing? And these folks can't tell you that what policy that they have advocated for. All that they want to do is sit there and say, well, I'm sticking to the Democrats. And that's throwing red meat to the base. So they love it. Say, oh, you're holding Democrats accountable. They're out of control, all this type of stuff. But while that's entertaining, and don't get me wrong, being in talk radio, that does get some laughs. And you can laugh at their expense. But what are you doing outside of laughing at the Democrats? Yeah, I can laugh at Democrats. But then I'm going to say, okay, this is what we're doing to move some policies forward and do all this type of stuff. Because even last year, the Black men's calls I was on, people say, oh, well, he's the Black Trump supporter. Why did you support Trump? I guess they thought I was going to say some talking points. But when I broke it down, I said, yeah, I agree that Trump makes a lot of mistakes. But when I broke it down, they said, oh, okay. They couldn't say nothing. They was expecting me to go off the deep end. And when I asked them, why did you support Joe Biden, they could explain that in policy to me. But I know I'm held to a higher standard. Oh, I got to give you a dissertation of why I vote for a Republican and why I do this. But when I asked, okay, now that I explain myself, could you tell me why you voted for the Democrats? Then they said they're farting and blowing spit bubbles and staring to the air. But I said, that's okay. I'm used to the double standards. It doesn't offend me no more. I mean, I got tough skin and all this type of stuff.
Okay. So, in saying that, what I want to ask you is that, and we talked about them using these Black online conservatives to say certain things that they don't want to say. The question is, why is their desire to say these things? So why is there such a demand in especially political media to have these Black people browbeat Black people in general? Why do we think there's a demand for that kind of content?
It's a demand for that content because they want people to say how they feel. Okay. So you want somebody to be the proxy to say what you feel. And this goes into, I'm going to use your term, dark persuasion. So again, I would never be invited to those panels because I'm going to talk about the issues. And I'm not expecting us to agree and all hold hands and sway and think we are the world. But at least we talk to each other like civil adults stop it, because even the men space, we can have panels and nobody yields to anybody. We say, well, thank you for coming, but nobody's mad or anything. We just stood our ground and said, okay, this is the issue we would never see eye to eye on. So I use the example of some of these panels. They don't want people who will have opinions that go outside the norm. They want people who fit that narrative, that they can say, oh, here's this out of touch black conservative over here that is thinking we all wore bow ties and we ate vegetables and we love white people, that protects us. So that gives them their little cheap kicks. And you got too many black conservatives that fall into that trap because they don't really believe in that. They got to have some self-hate issues, which kind of feels into the title of this show a little bit. To where, because you hate, I see so many people, they come to this movement, you have a lot of issues with black people. And I get it. You was a nerd, you was a cornball, you got to snort it when you laugh, you made like white girls, you made like Asian men or whatever, you made like anime and all this other shit. So they feel because black folks rejected them that now I can come over here with these white folks and I do like things in their quote unquote culture, and I can come over here and be accepted. And then now, because I have these issues with black people, I'm gonna kind of let it rip when they start talking about these social issues, and then they kind of feed into that. Just like getting a woman who hates men, she's over here now because I done made you feel comfortable. Now you let me know how you really feel, and you're saying what I want you to say, and I'm going to exploit that. These people are not knowing they're being exploited for the cause. And I know they don't like me doing this interview because I'm calling the shit out for what it is. So I already know because of this, I'm not going to get no invites, which you don't invite the shit anyway. You're not going to give me no radio show, which you never did anyway. You already know that I told you I accept the fact that I'm blacklisted. I embrace it. It's a red badge of courage now. So I get the fact that I told I was never going to get shit, I'm never going to be shit, whatever. But guess what? I'm still saying what I say. That should tell you something. Despite all that, I still believe in what I believe in. I also would give Democrats credit when they're right. I also give libertarians credit. I believe in, because again, I'm a policy wonk. But I lean more to the right when you look at how the scales go. So I tell people is, if you believe in what you're standing for, even if you're standing by yourself. And I've taken a lot of tough stances. I've been by myself. I've lost friendships. I've lost business. I've lost opportunities. But I don't regret what I have done and said.
Okay. Appreciate that feedback. So the next question is, why has the messaging, and we kind of touched on this, we're going to get into a little bit more. Why has the messaging for so many of the current batch of these online TV black conservatives transitioned into a pro-swirling and also a pro-integrationist message? And is that message similar to the current batch of black online TV liberals?
Yes, let's talk about that one. Now I can really get controversial. A lot of these folks, when you look at their views, particularly these what I call that. Now let me give a preface here. There's a difference between somebody who dates out and marries out because they truly love those people from other races. I would say I would fit that category, versus those that are doing it because they're so bad with black men or black women. Because if you truly have moved on, then why are you mocking and ridiculing black men and black women? I do agree with the pro-black talking point of once you choose the date, mate, and marry a person of a different race, you lose your right to criticize the women or the men, do a slash. If you're dating white men as a black woman, then I don't want to hear your complaints about black men. You have made your decision that black men are useless to you, that you say, hey, I love you, or what have you. So you're done with your criticisms. Just like a black man who's dating an Asian woman or whatever, we don't want to hear your concerns about black women. Now, you can still be concerned about black issues because at the end of the day, you're still black, but you can't sit here and join in these critiques that I see in these gender wars. And I see a lot of these swirlers. You got these white men at home, but yet you got all this shit to say about black guys. You're supposed to be so happy with your white man, your Asian man, your Chinese man, your whatever man, but you're sitting here bitching about black men all day. And I was saying the same thing about black men in these movements. Say, hey, you got these non-black women. Why does this shit bother you so much? And I asked that question especially in the SYSBM movement, which is Save Yourself Black Man. I say, if your tenements say, hey, we don't worship white women, we don't worship non-black women, we don't hate black women, but why are these guys who wave your flag out here talking about black women all day? If they're dating white girls and Asian girls or whatever, why are they doing it? But see, they come over here do all that mating shit because you think this is what's going to get you that non-black dick, that non-black pussy. And it doesn't work that way because you look like an idiot and people in the movement, both black and non-black, look at you like a fool. I've seen people join this movement. They think it's going to get them a white man. They think it's going to get them this. But they like to think, well, I'm a good Negro for interracial dating because I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative. Okay, you voted for Donald Trump once. Other than that, you vote for Democrat all your life. It wasn't that you saw the light and you thought Donald Trump's the best thing ever. You just did that because you thought that was going to be shocking to people. And nobody is interested or impressed. So you walk around here with a Trump 2020 shirt on in the hoods. I wish somebody would say something to me. And then you see these white people like, yeah, I'm one of y'all. What is that about? I mean, that's kind of foolish. But I say it goes back to a little bit of self-hatred movement because you get, as it goes back to what I said in the previous question, you bring your issues with black folks over here, couple with people who have closet issues with black folks, and it becomes a perfect toxic cocktail. Because, oh yes, you can say what I always want to say. They damn near want to say the word. Some of you all let these white folks, not saying these mid-town groups, you let these white folks down there call people park apes, porch monkeys, the darkies, the colors, and all that shit, and you say nothing. But you want to get mad at me when I check your white racist trans, and you want to say, "Oh, well, you just think of it from a racial lens." That's what. Well, at the end of the day, if he feels that black folks are park apes, what's to say that? How does he know the difference between you and the rest of Black America? Will he defend you in front of his racist white friends? Will she defend you in front of her racist white friends? And a lot of people get that, as they say in the Black First movement, you get that nigga wake-up call. You can do all that buck dancing for butter biscuits, but then when it comes time, when you come time for the biscuits to get out the oven, you realize you ain't getting one. So now you're mad that you did all this smack talk, but fail to realize that all this stuff is nothing but transaction stuff. You're a tool to them. You get to say what they want to hear. You don't have anything about the policy. You just want to just go to the RNC website, listen to Sean Hannity's talk show, and say, yeah, I'm a Republican, I'm a Republican, I'm a Republican, I'm a Republican. Because they smell money. They think, oh, I can get money over here to say this stuff. Just like I mentioned earlier about they want my men's advocacy. They want me to be the new Tommy Sotomayor. Well, Tommy's getting old. Tommy got a lot of issues that we're finding out about him. But hey, Dominic, you can be the new him. Your stuff checks out. Do you want this money? Do you want to get this stuff? And you can advocate for men, but you got to talk about women. I said, well, advocating for men and bashing women are two separate things. How are y'all going to merge it together? Just like in the Black conservative movement, how are you merging anti-blackness and Black conservatives together? And we got to really unattach that shit. And that's the thing that gets me about this. And I don't think nobody wants to have that conversation other than Dominic Huff and David Williams, and probably the people in the comment section.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the questions I had, and I kind of talked about this earlier, is that when they have their two faces of this quote unquote Black conservative movement, the Blexit movement, and they're very much, to me, they very much pro interracial relationships. And I don't have an issue if that's what you want to do individually, but to promote it as this is a better choice for Black people. And then also promote this, to me, they're not really conservatives, they're really integrationists. And one of the things, if you really study the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, is on the extremes of both parties, they have like a Black contingent who essentially under their wing. And their job is to just sit there and live on the extremes of those particular parties, be powerless, but think that they're getting a benefit from being attached to those parties. And that's kind of like their value proposition for why people should be over there. So if you look at the Democratic Party, you look at a lot of the far left stuff, they have a Black contingent that sits over there. They're powerless. They have no autonomy. They have no influence, but they're promoted as here's the benefit for being over here. And you see the same thing with the Republican side. And it's always interesting that they've made that decision. But I think what we've done and what we failed to do as Black people is create a benefit for being Black. And because we failed to create a benefit for being black, as a result, people look to get that benefit somewhere else. And I think they feel like they get that benefit in this particular political space. But I always wondered why they thought that would be a value proposition to bring more black people in, because it's so few black people, regardless of their political ideology, that think that's a benefit, especially if you're looking at the blacks that actually will go vote. So if you're just looking to build a big social media platform of white people, I guess it works. But if we're looking to actually try to get black people to look at political alternatives, I think it needs to be more than you have sexual access to white women or white men, and I get to live around white people.
You can do that now without being a black conservative, because as we see this, and I'm getting the charge of my computer and it's dying on me, but you can do all this now, but they think because, again, they have been rejected by mainstream black America, that this is their payback because they was rejected. So you want to come over here to this side of the space thinking, oh, you want to get everything that you never got with black folks, and you look like a fool doing it. Because you want that access. We all, we all want good schools. We all want fresh air. We all want quality food, safe neighborhoods, things like that. But instead of them embracing what we all do agree, let's say if I'm talking to a black liberal, the first thing, if somebody wants to ask me, like, well, why should I consider this? And I may use the example of, I said, well, how do you feel about the term defund the police? Oh, I don't want the police to fund. I feel we need more cops, yada, 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 yada. I said, well, why would you support somebody who wants to cut your police coverage down? Now, I do agree on the issue of, we need more services for marginalized people, such as mental health services and things like that. But even if you send and somebody who's gone on police calls as a journalist, even you send a therapist out here that's to a raging gunman, you still need somebody who can protect that therapist out there while they're trying to administer that service. So I can yield to that. So that's where you say, okay, he kind of agrees with this. Now let me hear more. And I gave them a solution to my critique. Versus when you're an idiot and you're this and you're that, yada, yada, yada. It's kind of like you want to mock and ridicule the same people you want to bring in. When we look at the data, and I love what you said earlier, Candace Owens, and we don't just stop picking on her, it's just all of them, they can't go talk to a 60-plus-year-old. They're the ones that vote. We look at everybody wants to buy TV ads. Everybody wants to put their stuff on TV because they know that's where the voters are at. So Candace cannot sit down with an old black woman or old black man.
Uh-oh. Let me see if he comes back. Let me tell him. Y'all give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Let me put this up. All right, y'all give me 1 second. Let me see if I can get him back.
Again. So where did
all right, my bad. Sorry about that. Huff cut out. Okay, so Huff started at the top.
That's
you were saying that Candace Owens could not speak to an older black audience.
All right, Candace Owens couldn't speak to an older black audience because she wouldn't know how to relate to the older black audience. Candace Owens has probably never been on a political campaign. Candace Owens has probably never looked at political data. Candace Owens probably doesn't know how to even do targeted messaging. So you use that shop jock stuff, which is cute for the safety of a radio booth or sitting on your phone or a blog talk radio. But now you're dealing with somebody who dealt with Jim Crow racism. Yeah. Now you tell them that shit is in their head, and they'll probably slap the shit out of you. Or you come to a poor neighborhood like Kim Placid did and walk around. She made a good point with the video. But the problem was, and a lot of people point this out, well, Kim, what is your plan if elected to Congress? You're in a district that is overwhelmingly Democrat. And Black conservatives had this whole thing, I want to take that mountain and flip it, and you're doing it with such a short runway. Nobody knows who you are. I always joke, and I'm not trying to just pat myself on the back, but if I chose to run as a Republican in Fulton County, I probably could get the most votes in the South Fulton County area because people know who I am. Now, there's still some people that would probably say that are next my name, like, I like you, but I just can't. And I get that because you still have, because I still got to think about the Washington Republicans. I still got to think about those other fools. So you get people say, I like Dominique, but I don't like his party. So I can't vote for him because I'm afraid that Dominique, once I put him in there, that now he has that party that he's a part of, that they will come and want him to do all this stuff because he's their guy now. So that's the political reality that we have to look at. So they have to understand that we have to realize that less than 10% of people vote. Yeah. Then when you're looking at the women who vote, most of the voters are women. So you can't have this whole ultra-conservative, bitch, get in the kitchen mindset, go over there, listen to your man. You got mostly women voting. Then you got to think about these women are educated. These women have money. These women have a lot of say. So if your message, if you look at the Democrat strategy, Democrats were able to galvanize suburban white women. The Republicans don't know how to galvanize anybody. Only Republicans want to do is talk about, well, how can we touch Black folks? Well, let's have an event for Black people up here at this white country club and hope they come show up. But good luck to that. Y'all have tried that so many times, and people are just flocking up there to the point we can't find rooms big enough to hold all the Black folks that want to come up to the country club and sit with a whole bunch of old white people who are rich and talk about, well, you know, I got through all this through hard work, and everybody look at you like bullshit. So it's just like we lack self-awareness. We lack the whole, you think that everybody's like you, but you feel to look at, okay, I live in a Black neighborhood. I see poverty. I see unemployment. I see opportunity. But how can we connect people to the opportunities? People are surprised at the work I do in these neighborhoods. They say, oh, I'm surprised you're a Republican. I said, well, because I look at policies and how can they help the people? Because that's what I look at. First Step Act helped a lot of people. Bill was one of them. So we got to look at also, too, we can't just we have learned the era of mass incarceration does us no favors. We also learned that we can't use the county jails now are our biggest homeless shelters, our biggest mental institutions, and they were never designed for that. Sheriffs across the country are raising hell about that. So now we have to say, okay, what can we do now to address the fact we have a lot of social ills that are spilling into the public space that government is going to have to resolve? We can say, oh, I don't want the government to do all of that. I say, okay, well, you don't want the government to do all of that, but yet when that person's breaking in your house, that person's having a seizure fit, and I've seen this a lot with our people that have mental issues here in Atlanta, that where you have a person who is spazzing out because they're having a seizure. You're
freezing again. Okay, so let me do this. Because let me try to get them back one more time. Let me go ahead and go to the big screen. Give me 1 second, y'all. All right, you back?
Yeah, I'm on my
Okay.
hotspot this time. You know, this internet here in this office going to be intermittent, so I'm just going to use my hotspot on my iPhone, so I know iPhones will last from now to doomsday. But I look at it as we have to begin to adjust our messaging. We have to look at now of how to solve complex social issues that are now straining our local governments. And this whole "it ain't my problem" that the private sector do with is not going to do anything. We tried the whole privatizing the jails, and that turned out to be a disaster because after a while, guess what? When you privatize something, guess what? There's a profit incentive in this. A public service should not be privatized because the public transit system, for example, there's no public transit system in the country that is profitable, that makes a ton of money because it is providing a service of getting our citizens from point A to point B. And it was supposed to be designed to help us move, connect the workers to the jobs, help us with our environment, get less cars off the road. But we know in the South, there was a whole, racism stopped us from doing what we need to do. And we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to be able to be a better steward of our government dollars? Secondly, I know another talking points that I did mention the South. Some people argue, well, the South was Democrat doing all that racist stuff. And it's funny how we support the same party that hung Confederate flags in front of the Capitals, that wrote all these Jim Crow policies, this and the third. But I tell the Republicans, well, what are we doing to show that we're writing better policies, that we're moving that forward? We can talk about the history all day. I'm all for the history. How did we get here? But now that we know how we got here, like me, I know how we got here, that what we'll do to get out this mud. And nobody wants to really get there. Because see, problems are profitable. They love the problems. See, a lot of these black conservatives like the fact that they're getting all this money to pretend to help bring black folks over here, which they ain't doing a damn thing. So they come over here, send all this stuff, getting all the money, getting all the checks, but no problems being solved. See, I I told people, this stuff will put people out of business because once the problem is solved, we can move to a new problem. Then after we solve that problem, we go to another problem and keep going and going and going. But because problems are profitable, nobody wants to deal with this. So therefore, we'll continue to spin around the bathtub drain. Republicans wonder why that the society's getting more liberal, getting more democratic, because they're doing a terrible job of this embracing people. You have to embrace diversity. You can't just embrace the pet Negro, or as the young ladies say, the pit me women. You have to embrace people who look and sound like the people who are trying to go after. And that's what they're doing a terrible job at.
Yeah, and I want to agree with that. And I want to say this before we go ahead and transition to the next segment is that, and I've said this before, is I don't think the Republican Party, based on their history, probably over the last 20 years, and I'm not diminishing any work that you've done or any black person's doing in the Republican Party or to get Republican candidates. I just don't think on a national level, they're very much invested in bringing the black vote on. Because like I said, is that to me, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are the same. They operate, their core base operates on extremes. The Democratic Party, their core base, when they deal with black people, is to make black people think everything's racism. The Republican Party, from a core standpoint, when they're dealing with black people, is to act as if racism doesn't exist. And that's how they keep their constituency going. And so I think it's difficult for Republicans to deal with an older black demographic that was raised during Jim Crow, that has experienced overt racism, especially in a lot of the areas in the Southeast, to make it seem as if racism doesn't exist. And let me give you an example. My father and Herman Cain went to the same college in Georgia. We know because the college is in Atlanta. We're in the same age group. I know for a fact Herman Cain dealt with racism. He's from Georgia. He grew up in that particular era. But for him to fit in those circles, racism can never be an issue. But the problem is, how do you deal with people where racism and Jim Crow shaped their life? But the Republican Party their narrative has been for so long that racism doesn't exist. It's all in your head. Any incidents of racism is really misunderstanding. And the Democratic Party tries to frame everything as racism, which they do a lot. They spend a lot of time trying to frame everything as racism. But the other extreme is it doesn't exist. And to me, this is why this online conservative is going to be ineffective against people that actually vote, is because they've actually dealt with racism. On top of that, they can't speak to policy. So if we're not going to deal with racism, then we got to speak to policies that actually help people. Instead, what we're doing is we are telling black people about behavioral politics. We're telling black people that, they should swirl. We're telling black people that I'm living a better life because I live around white people. I don't have to live around black folks. And these are our talking points, but those aren't policy related. So you can be the director of urban outreach, you can do the Blexit thing, yada, 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 but you're still not speaking to policies that are going to improve Black people's lives. And like you said before, it's probably because they don't know policy.
They don't. Because they do policy, we'll be having a whole different conversation where our policy conversations, we look at what's the best solution for the people that we're doing. Like, what may work in the state of Georgia may not work in the state of Texas, and vice versa. And that's where I agree with the conservatives as that we look at each state knows what's best for them. There's something that may work in Illinois, it's not going to work down here. Something that works in Florida is not going to work in California. So as you see, a lot of that's where that's why you have a governor. That's why you have a House of Representatives and a Senate. Even though there's some people that think those things are the same, I'm like, remember that little inside joke, don't you, Dave?
Yeah.
That people thought that there's no difference. I just sit there and laugh. But, we have to look at really segmenting the governments. And people think that, case in point, here in Georgia, Republicans created all these new cities that we have here in Metro Atlanta. Because, we went from, I want to live unincorporated because I get no city, I can do what I want, to now I need a city, which gives you a whole new set of elected officials, and which means now I have to pay the city, I have to pay the county, all that type of stuff. But that's something that works here. It may not work elsewhere. In Texas, there's no unincorporated areas. Everybody's in the city, no matter where you live in Texas. Their cities are larger, some cities are smaller. They have way more counties. They're the biggest state, land-wise. So you look at what works there for them, what works here for us. We got to look at states like Mississippi. So you have a lot of people who prefer to be left alone, because the reason what we're dealing with is you have the rural needs and the urban needs are clashing. So where people who live in the urban areas are pretty much have the most needs, because we're the center. We have all the people here. But people in the rural areas, like when I drive through Mississippi and Alabama going to Louisiana for business, you see a lot of, people say, well, we don't need no mask ordinance. Like, my neighbor is 2 miles away. Look how spaced out we are. We are social distancing. Why would we need all these band-aids? So that's where we're putting each pocket against each other. Because if you're looking at, okay, we can't govern a rural area that would do this and vice versa, and look at these populations. We're also dealing with the fact we have an aging population that we have to address. What are we going to do about those services for those group of people? We're dealing with people that have a lot more younger people that have health issues. So it's a lot of things where we can't personal accountability our way out of some of these problems. We can work with that with the younger generation to say this is how you got to start thinking about. But we have people who are already here. What do we do about them? So I get where liberals come from. And I also tell people, too, that, okay, we have to make sure that we're not creating a government state, because after a while, I always tell people, you can't tax and spend your way to prosperity. After a while, you'll run out of everybody else's money. What are you going to do when you run out of money? Because I can't tell you to pay more taxes. Then after that goes away, that's why I don't support, case in point, these, what they call sin tax. Taxes on cigarettes. I don't smoke, so I don't really care. I don't smoke nor drink. But I do not support taxing those items. You know why? Because after a while, simple economics. People will stop buying cigarettes and go someplace else. So now you was relying on all that money from those cigarette taxes. Now you're not doing it because you're trying to discourage smoking. You figure, well, since you're going to smoke, I'm going to charge $0.25 a pack, so we'll put this tax towards something else. Now that people are cutting back from smoking, they say, oh, well, that's tax alcohol now. Then when people stop drinking, or we go back to the days of what they call the moonshining or what have you, then what are you going to do then? So after a while, that's why I said you can't tax and spend your way, because people just revolt and stop buying something. Like when I see a lot where I don't buy stuff in the city because it's cheaper to go to the suburb. So everybody goes to the suburb to buy it. So that's why you see business move over there. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we trying to do here? And I just use that as an example of that's a policy you get behind people. Say, okay, aren't you tired of not having quality stores in your neighborhood? Well, look at the tax rate. So why would you pay, like, when you buy your groceries, where are you buying your groceries? I go to the suburbs and the tax is cheaper. Well, why are taxes not cheaper in your area? They start thinking about that. This is how you can really sit down and have some conversations about things when we do agree. Are we going to all agree all the time? No. but let's look at what is in front of somebody's face that matters to them. If, David, I would not come to you or any man talk about reproductive rights. You don't have a uterus. You don't have a womb. So you can give two shits about that topic. That is an inappropriate conversation for me to have with being, and for being to have on a platform, but a conservative woman can go to that woman about that and have that conversation. Like, I would not send a young white guy to talk to poor black people. You grew up in the suburbs and you're affluent and you're talking to a bunch of people who are over here struggling. It's just the optics are bad. It doesn't, the intent to offend even a black person who's doing well. If you're not that true bootstrap story, then nobody wants to hear about you had your trust fund and you started $1 million business. We're not the same. I know a whole bunch of people that started a business that can't get credit, they can't get capital, can't get anything. But you want to tell me that I'm the same as the bootstrapper who had a trust fund, who married to wealth, who married a wealthy spouse. That's the condescending, insulting stuff that I kind of called out with the movement, because we're now kind of being very disingenuous with the causes.
Okay. And so I want to ask you real quick. So, and we added on, this alexstovall incident. And so for people that don't kind of know what it's about, is alexstovall was running for a political position in I want to believe Arizona. And there's a particular media platform that kind of quote unquote exposed him, that he was making a lot of pejorative statements against the Republican Party, certain political figures or conservative figures, and saying that a lot of people were not proponents of policy. They were just more into personalities and characters and things of that nature. And I wanted to kind of get your feedback on that, because I know that you deal with a lot of candidates. You've worked on a lot of campaigns, and you could kind of understand from a campaign management standpoint, kind of what is your feedback of that incident?
It's kind of par for the course, because it kind of hurts independent media. Okay. Because a lot of times, like being independent media, we have candidates that kind of get a little skeptical about us sometimes. And I've been around my media with the newspaper since 2009. I understand we're not fully out there. We're still the little inch that could, but we got to kind of look at now, as we market and promote ourselves, it's going to take time. It goes back to the whole, I'm not comparing myself to somebody that started their company with $50,000. I started with nothing. So I think we did pretty good. But anywho, a lot of times you get a lot of people who pretend to be journalists. So sometimes, a lot of candidates do want to vet you out. What type of media do you do? Let me see your platform at work. Let me see, are you really doing stuff? Are you just somebody that my opposition sent? Because, I support this media decentralization, but it's also made people run afoul of media ethics. So where you're now charging people, if you don't buy advertisements from my media outlet, then I'm going to slander you in my publication. That's now I'm starting to see extortion now from these media companies, where they're doing that stuff now, and I don't condone it. I've called that out as well. So that's why now I can't stand fake journalists that do that. And I also know with these bloggers can be very vicious, because they're technically not journalists, so they can say a whole bunch of stuff. They know SEO, search engine optimization, that can really do some damage to a candidate campaign. Then we have social media influencers who know how to put stuff online and go viral and all that. So we're having a lot of things now that have changed this landscape. And that's why you saw the rise of conservative media, especially with sites like Newsmax, Town Hall, and other sites, because at one time, the conservative voice was not heard in mainstream media. So the internet gave conservatives the voice they always wanted, so they could be heard. They can say, okay, now we can talk what we want to. We don't have to worry about being filtered. We don't have to worry about our editors being so liberal. That's why Fox News grew up so fast, because people felt we finally have an outlet that speaks to us. Now we can argue journalistic quality all day about some of this stuff. There are some outlets that do very well. There are some outlets they're entertaining the parties. So with that incident, I will ask the campaign managers, did you vet that media outlet? Because we can't go along with this whole any press is good press. Sometimes people can say, rightfully so, I've told candidates, you're not talking to that journalist. There are certain talk shows I would not let my candidates go on. I don't care if the talk show host paid us. I know they're a piece of shit. So why am I going to send my candidate over to get ambushed, especially when I know this person's on the tape? And you get a lot of these Democrat pundits that would love to get conservatives over there and play this gotcha game and trip you up and everything and turn to a shouting match, and you look like a fool over there. I tell you, never argue with a fool, because after a while, we don't know who's the fool. You are the fool. So that's just good politics. Like, I mean, I don't expect Joe Biden to talk to every media outlet. I didn't expect Donald Trump to talk to every media outlet. So that's an experience that I see. They should have known better. They should have really thought about that long and hard. Like, even with the best vetting, you can still sometimes miss something. But I tell people, I don't expect the journalist to carry my water. I don't expect the commentator to give me a fair shake. But I do expect you to at least be fair. That's the only I can expect of you.
Definitely, Chris. I appreciate that feedback. So go ahead and get your closer. So I want to ask you, because I know my closer is going to be a little long. Did you want to close out first, or did you want me to close out first and you wrap it up?
Since it's your show, I can close out first. I'll let the host have the last word.
Okay, I appreciate it. So what do you like? What would you like to say in close, and go ahead and wrap up pretty much everything we talked about this evening?
Well, I enjoyed this conversation. It was definitely something that's well needed. And I think more Black conservatives will have to sit down and have this conversation. Some of us like to be internal. Some will need to be public. I mean, we got to look at what is the end goal of all this stuff. Are we trying to get better policies that can help Black people? Are we trying to advance the Black race? Are we trying to meet Black people where they are? Black people have changed since the 60s. And we have to meet Black people where they're at. And unfortunately, we're using dated strategies that are not touching Black folks. And we have to ask ourselves that, are these conversations about policy? Are these conversations about party? You can't shame somebody for voting for your party. And you're basically saying, if you're on the plantation, I want you to join my plantation. No, you have to say, well, what's in it for me? And shout out to Tariq Nasheed when he pushed the whole tangibles movement. We need tangibles. No tangibles, no vote. And I apply that over here to say, hey, let's lay out tangibles like Ice Cube did with Donald Trump, for example. Ice Cube went to Trump and Joe Biden in 2020 about his plan for Black America. The Democrats told Ice Cube, talk to us after the election. Trump sat down with him, and people demonized Ice Cube for sitting down and talking with Donald Trump. I tell people, regardless of who's in office, I have to sit down and talk to whoever, because I still got to get stuff done. And sometimes we get so caught, like we don't have the white liberal privilege of being able to say, hey, we can be able to just act like a fool and we still get what we want. I'm not saying be respectable and kiss their ass either, but we got to play the game of chess, and we're not winning right now. So we got to start thinking, I'm not here to tell you to be a Republican. I'm not here to tell you to be conservative. I'm not here to tell you to be a libertarian. I'm telling you, it's time to be a free agent. It's time now to look at what are we getting. It's time now to stop voting because our parents voted that way. That was a different time our parents came up in. That was a different time our grandparents came up in. Is that way working for you? Are you satisfied with your elected officials? I challenge anybody who's listening to me right now. I'm sure most people on this show try to know who their elected officials are. But ask yourself, are you being served by them? What policies have they introduced? Like, what have been their votes on the issues? Let's not look at the federal level. Let's start with the city council. Let's start with the county commission. Let's start with the state house. Let's start with the state senate. Let's go to our government. I'm all about 10th Amendment, states' rights. Let's look at that from a state level and a local level. Am I being served on my local level? Am I voting my interests? Let's vote for our interests to where we can start getting things done. Let's start buying politicians or renting politicians to get our agenda moved forward. This whole debate about a party, I'm over that. Who cares? I can deal with the fact that if I got to go to Democrats to get some shit done and they can at least give me 60% of what I want, I'm happy. That's why anything over 50%, shout out to Tim Alexander, anything over 50% is the majority. So I got majority of what I wanted. You will always throw some bullshit in there anyway just to get them the strokes by his ego where they start cutting over. You can't get everything. You know that's the favorite song. You ain't gonna get everything. So I throw some stuff in there I want you to cut, but I still get what I wanted. So I'm all about let's be more politically astute. Let's make sure we really get down to the nitty gritty of this and ask ourselves when these midterm elections coming up, is my party serving me? Are my elected officials serving me? Stop saying things are a wasted vote. Stop saying a third party is a wasted vote or I got to vote because my ancestors died. If you feel there's nothing to vote for, stay home. There's nothing wrong with that. Your vote, your choice. If you feel that I'm not getting nothing out of this, don't vote for that person at all. Vote for the other person. Sometimes we just have to send a message, as the NAACP says best, your vote is your voice. So why are we still giving a party close to 100% of that vote? Now, that's a question we have to ask each other individually. That's a question the Republicans are going to ask themselves why they're doing a terrible job with outreach. That's a question Black conservatives have to ask, why are they not moving the needle? And they've been out here cooling and jump driving and all that shit for years. So there's a lot of hard questions. They're not ready to have the conversation, but I am. And I'm going to continue to do what I can do for my space. Learn more about me. Go to We the People Talk. I'm a public policy wonk. That's We the People Talk. That's on Facebook. It's facebook.com, We the People Talk. I got the website I got to get built up. You can also follow my local news at Homeroom News. Go to that website. And then you got Dominique Magazine, which is DominiqueMag.com. So check out our content. If you got any questions, you can call me at 404-451-1240. That's 404-451-1240. Or you can email me at me@DominiqueHuff.com. That's me@DominiqueHuff.com. I always tell people, what other company would give you his cell phone and his email if he's not doing that? As we say in talk radio, ain't no formula for me.
Okay, and I'm gonna tell the audience is that one thing about Huff is that I met him on the internet. I met him on Facebook, and he was having I forgot what it was, like a networking function on the West
Second
Side.
Mondays.
Yeah, so I went over there, and this was back when he was at that guy who owned the security guard business. So we was way on the West Side. And what impressed me was that the same way, and this is something that people have said about me also, is the same way he presents himself on the internet, he's that person in real life. So there's no difference between, there's not like Huff don't go into I got an internet persona and I act this way on the internet because it's going to make me successful, but in real life, I'm a different person. He's essentially the same person. In fact, he might be pulling back a little bit from the internet because we don't want to get banned, but there's a consistency in his behavior. And also, he's a boots on the ground person. The reason why I got a lot of respect for him is it don't matter whether or not I agree with what he's saying all the time. He's actually doing this stuff in real life. So he's doing initiatives in his community. He's doing cleanups. He's doing things to get people involved. He's always been a proponent of Black business, especially in Southwest Fulton. He helped me get a lot of media. He introduced me to a lot of people in business that could have been good clients for me. He didn't have to do that. He wasn't going to get paid for it. He did it because he's a proponent of BOBs. So I got the utmost respect for him. And it's people like this that I feel like we need to promote it because they live it like they talk it and they got a large degree of integrity. And even if you don't agree with them, you know they're not doing things just for the money. So I want to really encourage everybody to reach out to this guy because he's somebody that can help you from a business standpoint. He can help you from a political standpoint. The sister up in B-More, she needs your kind of help because B-More is a cutthroat environment. And you're not going to be able to be successful just being a pretty face up there. That's a cutthroat environment. So you need some men that can actually show you how to game plan that properly, or else you're just doing a pretty face social media campaign. This is the kind of guy that can help you. So I really want to encourage everybody to reach out to this guy because he does have solutions. He's a deep thinker. He's an action-oriented guy. He's a real man about his, and he has solutions that can help you get to what you want. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my closing because you know, we like to look at the markets here, even though we had pretty much a political conversation, but I kind of want you to look at this from a market-based standpoint. I have a lot of issues with a lot of these online, quote unquote, Black conservatives. I think a lot of the content that they're creating is derogatory to Black people. And they're no different to me than a lot of these rappers that create content that's really, really derogatory to Black people. What we've been historically told that we should do against these types of people is argue back and forth with them on the internet. One of my biggest issues, and people notice because I talked about this before, is the Breonna Taylor issue. And we're going to kind of go into that because I'm going to give you a solution to the problem as opposed to just going back and forth with somebody on the internet. Because what you got to understand is that if I have a Twitter following, or if I have a YouTube following, or if I even have a Facebook following, any engagement promotes me inside that particular algorithm. So whether the engagement is negative or positive, you're telling Facebook that I'm somebody to where my content should be promoted because what? It gets a reaction. So let me show you what I'm talking about, right? So we're going to get into it. Let me go ahead and share this real quick. Let me stop this particular screen. Let me share this out because I want you to see the window. Okay, so let's go ahead and get right to it. And we're going to make this quick. And if you got any questions, put them in the comments because we may have time for questions later on. Let me go ahead and share this window out. So what we're looking at right now is we're looking at the Breonna Taylor incident. We talked about this before. And one of my biggest issues is you got a guy on the internet who's a quote unquote prominent Black conservative entertainer. He's really more entertainer than conservative. And he really went out of his way to support this particular action that resulted in Breonna Taylor getting fired. And I want to show you from a documentation standpoint why I have such an issue with this. Let me go ahead and put this document in the chat and get you to understand is that the way to deal with these type of individuals, okay, this particular document is in the chat. The way to deal with these type of individuals is not to go back and forth with them on the internet. And I'm going to kind of show you what I mean. So we're dealing with this particular board. This is dated June 30th, 2021, right? This particular detective who applied for the search warrant for Breonna Taylor's apartment got fired from the force. He went in front of a board because he's a union member and they fired him. What I want you to understand is that when this situation came out, a lot of these people, including this particular man that we're talking about, I wouldn't call him a man, I would call him a male, but this particular male that we talked about, they tried to run a distraction campaign around what happened with Breonna Taylor. So the argument was she or was she not a paramedic? Was she or was she not involved with narcotics or drugs? Was this a justified no-knock warrant? The reason why they tried to spin this particular narrative is because the documentation that got them the warrant was false. And we're going to show you that in documentation. This man, this particular detective or officer, right? He put on the documentation that he verified, right, with the U.S. Postal Inspector that Taylor's ex-boyfriend was receiving packages at her office. Now, I want you to understand, he put on the actual warrant that he had verified with the U.S. Postal Inspector, who's a federal agent, that this particular boyfriend was receiving was receiving postage at this particular mail, and he was suspected of dealing drugs. And he used that as part of his narrative to get this particular warrant. Now, when you go to get a warrant, he stood in front of a circuit court judge, and he gave an oath that all the information in that warrant was based on his knowledge was exact. What we found out during the hearing, right, was that this was not true. So if you look at this particular document, let's go to it. You have paragraph number 9 right here, right? And it says right here that he verified through a U.S. Postal Inspector that Jamarcus Glover had been receiving packages at 303 Springfield Drive, right? Now, the issue was that he put this on the warrant. He took an oath that this information was correct. But then when he got into the hearing, what did he say? He said that that information was not correct. Just off that, he should have been fired. That should have been the end of the hearing, because he took an oath that this information was correct to substantiate, right, that we need to get a warrant to go into this woman's house to try to figure out, does she have any particular materials or any items that may be involved with narcotics trafficking or the narcotics trade? But in reality, there was no U.S. Postal Inspector that he verified this with. When he got into this particular hearing, what he now said was that there was another officer, right, that told him that 2 other officers had a CI that told them that this particular male was receiving items at this particular house, right? So he never knew this from the U.S. Postal Inspector, but he put this on this particular warrant, and he took an oath in front of a circuit court judge that this information was right and exact based on his knowledge. But then he got in a hearing and he said something different. This male, who's a prominent Black conservative, right, went out of his way to justify what happened in this particular incident. And he did everything he could do to besmirch and destroy the character of this woman. These men violated this woman's 4th Amendment, which is illegal, unreasonable search and seizure, right? They violated this woman's 4th Amendment rights. And to justify it, they tried to destroy the particular character of this woman. Now, I'm going to show you something else. The postal inspector said that, you know what? The Metro Police did not use his office to verify that a drug suspect was receiving packages at Breonna Taylor's apartments. So all of this is in the documentation. But this particular male went on an extensive campaign. He did it on YouTube. He went to his own website where he has a quote unquote news blog. He puts information there. He has other Confederates in this particular space that did the same thing to destroy the character, to try to justify what happened that night. When in reality, the warrant, the justification for the warrant, this particular item number 9 was false, which means that every other item on this warrant can be questioned, because if he lied about that, what else did he lie about? Right? That led to those people showing up at her house, which as a result led to this woman dying. Why this man is not going to jail for perjury because he took an oath is, I don't understand it, but he's not. So he lost his job. She lost her life. These are the kind of people that are promoting themselves as black conservatives, people that don't respect people's personal liberties. They don't respect people's individual rights. And these people will say or do anything for money as long as they think that's what their audience wants to hear. And the question I want to ask you is what makes them different than the rappers that they criticize? So we know Miss Owens will say anything for money. As long as she thinks that's what her audience wants to hear, she'll say anything. This male will also say anything for money. Now, what we've been taught to do is go back and forth with them on the internet. We've been taught to, try to get their pages taken down. That helps them? It doesn't help us. What I want you to understand is that as long as they stay in the private space, there's nothing you can do about it. Why? Because they're private. But what I've been telling you on this channel for the past year, first, influence and power is built over time. It's not built overnight. So you need to constantly be thinking about building your influence and your power. And that's something I talk about in my dark persuasion classes that I know a lot of people are not ready for because they don't really want the power. The second thing is, as long as they stay in the private sector, we can't do anything. But when they try to move into public arenas is where you now can impact them. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So this particular individual, right, became an advisor to this particular publicly owned company called K-West. So the ticker is K-West, KWESST. They are non-lethal low energy cartridge system, right? So this is dated July 21st. Now, how do we know this? Because we read Bloomberg on this channel. That's why I tell all my traders, you got to be reading all the time. So this information is public, right? So they're partnering with this guy. He got 1.6 million subscribers on this particular channel. He's going to be essentially an advisor. He's also going to be a promotional face of this particular company. What they're giving him in compensation, let me see. He's getting, it's an 18-month agreement. They're getting him 1,500 or 150,000 performance stock units. And you want to Google performance stock units. He's getting 350,000 restricted stock units. You want to Google what those are. And he's getting 150,000 share appreciation rights in a company with the company's long-term plan. And they're going to be exercisable at a CD price of 1.65, right? So he's getting a lot of performance-based stocks under this particular, I think, 18-month agreement, okay? This man, I'm going to stop saying man, right, because I'm using that as a colloquialism. This male, he's now at a point to where he's trying to transition to a public space because that's where the real wealth is at. Because we understand social media fame only lasts so long. You're only going to have so much of a run in social media. So in his mind, everything I've done to get to this point is justified. Why? Because it got me to this particular point. So it doesn't matter what he had to say. This is the same guy that celebrated the fact that a 12-year-old with a toy gun got shot. He literally celebrated this on his platform because he thought that's what the people that attended his platform want to hear. So this is where he's trying to transition to next, right? Because we talked about before, social media only is going to last so long. Now, here's the ticker of this particular company, right? Because we looked it up, right? They're currently traded yesterday at 1.62, right? They're what we call, they're not a micro cap, but they're not a small cap. They're kind of in between, right? So if you go to your particular brokerage, what they are is they're what we call an OTC. They're not a pink sheet, but they're an OTC, and they're traded on the Toronto Exchange. This is a Canadian-based company. So what we're looking at is a float of around 28.3 million. They're not really being heavily shorted. They don't have a lot of institutional buy-in, and we're looking at all their metrics. They're negative, right? Because essentially they're not a startup, but they're trying to get to even considered really like a small cap company. Okay. What you got to understand is this. We talked about before, active investing, right? Buying into publicly owned companies and influencing the direction that these particular companies go. Why? Because you're owner. That's another reason why we promote ownership. That's another reason why I'm happy to have a relationship with people like Erica Williams that also heavily promotes ownership. And I'm not at the ownership level that I should be. I'm still continuing to work there. But this is one of the reasons why you got to look at owning things. Why? Because with ownership becomes power. Okay? Because we can influence their relationship with this particular individual. Why? Because we have ownership. Now, I can't give you investment advice. I definitely can't tell you, how to invest. But in a hypothetical world, I would form a trading group. I would buy into this particular deal, and I would tell them that this guy got to go because he doesn't meet the values, right, and the morals and the mission statement of this particular company. And they're very, very cheap stock currently right now. If you look at their chart, I don't think they've ever traded anything over $8, right? So they're still trying to get their feet in the game, right? I think they just might have signed like $1 million deal the other day. So in that fact, they haven't traded anything over $250. Okay, so they're very, very low tier stock. So this is why I really communicate to our people that we got to worry about capital accumulation. We got to worry about building power. And it has to be something that you're very much invested in ownership so you can impact these type of situations, because this is what these people are trying to do. They're no different than these rappers. They sit in their house and they try to figure out what kind of negative content they can create around black people to sell to white folks. That's a fact. They sell this negative content about black people to white people. They're going to try to use that to become liquid rich, right? And then they're going to try to transit into another situation to make them wealthy because they're not a face of this particular thing. And this is what this guy has attempted to do. This is the CEO, a chairman of this particular company. We also found him on Bloomberg. Okay, so this is the chairman. This is their investor contact. Okay, so these are their stock tickers, right? They're also, like we talked about before, they trade on the Toronto exchange. So normally what you would have to do is get in contact with your broker and ask them about how to acquire shares in a company like this. Like I said, I can't give you investment advice, right? That's their investor relations. But as an owner in these type of companies, you're a shareholder now. You now have the ability to vote, and you also have the ability to get your voice heard at shareholder meetings. And this is why I tell you ownership is so important in these particular financial markets. You got to look at these things from a market-based perspective, because this environment will continue to produce bad actors like this that will justify and try to validate the fact that agents of the government will violate a person's constitutional rights and their individual liberties. And we're at a stage in our society to where the government has been doing this so long, the flunkies of the government support these type of actions now, right? So it used to be that the government would just sit around and make a narrative around why they did what they did. Now their flunkies are making narratives because they're so full of arrogance and pride. And this guy did everything he did to make this woman look incorrect. And we have documentation to prove the actual warrant is in the link that this man lied on the warrant to get the justification to go into this woman's house. Then he got an hearing and he changed the story. So he never spoke to the postal inspector and verified that this particular suspect was receiving packages at her house. So that means everything else on that warrant is suspect. And this is what I want you to understand how to play this game. Stop going back and forth with these people on the internet. You're just boosting their internet profile. As long as they stay on these private media platforms, the Daily Wire, things of that nation, there's nothing you can do about them. Make them always stay there on the fringes. When they try to move mainstream into these mainstream spaces, these publicly owned spaces, this is where we can impact these particular people. And so, sooner or later, we're going to have to make an example out of somebody to let them understand that you can't treat us like this. Now, here's going to be your homework. First, you need to look up those type of shares. And the next thing that you need to understand is this right here. Look up this right here. The documentary is on YouTube. Because what happened here is very similar to what happened to Breonna Taylor. This happened in the early 90s. I think this happened like 92, 93. Okay? And they did the same thing to this man that they did to Breonna Taylor. They did this action against this particular man, and then they tried to create a campaign to destroy this particular name of this man to justify what they did to him. But at this time, this is the early 90s, it was coming from government. We're at a point now to where flunkies of the government are the people that are promoting that, you know what, this type of action should take place against citizens. So this isn't anything new, right? A lot of people would also compare this to Waco, but to me, this more resembles Ruby Ridge. So go Google that when you got a chance. It's a good documentary. And what they try to do is create every narrative around why they felt like they had to do this, the same thing they do with Breonna Taylor. This is how you impact this type of stuff, as opposed to going back and forth with these people on the internet. Okay. So we got any questions before we get up on out of here? I just wanted to put that feedback in there. Let me remove that real quick. We got any questions before we get out of here? Because it's been a long show. We've been going on almost 2 hours. Okay, so since we don't have any questions, Huff, I want to appreciate you coming through, man. I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy person, and if you got any other things that you want to come on, I know we're gonna try to do something in 2022. But I really appreciate it. Look like we don't have no questions, so we're gonna get ready to close because we're pretty much at the 2 hour mark, and so I appreciate all the time you gave to my particular audience.
All right, thank you all. We'll talk soon.
All right, no problem. So let me go ahead and end this broadcast.